Hello everyone, my name is Justin Newhall. I'm the proprietor of Justin Newhall Railroad Media here on YouTube. I was doing some research the other day on the Union Pacific gas turbines for an upcoming video. Check it out when it comes out. I have something really cool planned for the 1,000 subscriber special. Keep an eye out for that. But anyway, I was doing some research on the UP gas turbines, and I found this picture. It shows a Union Pacific gas turbine paired with a couple of U-50 locomotives from General Electric. And it made me ask the question, why did Union Pacific order such large locomotives over such a long period of time that other railroads just didn't bother with? After all, the Union Pacific has a history of ordering very large motive power, dating back nearly 100 years to the building of the 9000 series 412-2s, and continuing nearly to the present day with the AC 6000 and SD90 projects. Before we go any further, I just wanted to remind you guys that I do have membership options now. If you want to support my channel further and allow me to continue to create better and better content as I have been doing, go ahead and support me. Become a member. I will list you guys in the credits of each video, and there will be some members-only videos coming out. I also plan on, if I don't release a video right away, it will go to members first before it will go to the general public. So if you want my videos before anyone else and you want to see your name at the end of these videos, make sure you check that out down below. That would help me a lot. Thank you. By my reckoning, these orders for ever larger locomotives has stemmed from a combination of four factors. The railroad operates over difficult and desolate terrain with limited population. Management has been willing to approve ambitious projects and experimentation. The railroad has the infrastructure to support such locomotives. And the company has been consistently strong and stable financially. While these four factors are not unique to the Union Pacific at any given time, they have combined to make the perfect storm for the construction of truly massive iron horses for nearly a century. First, let's go through a short recap of Union Pacific's freight locomotive purchases of the last century. Then we'll examine why the railroad made the choices it did. I won't go into too much detail on the history of the locomotives themselves to save you guys a bit of time. If you want me to go more into detail on these locomotives in the future, let me know in the comments below. In 1926, Union Pacific was looking to speed up its freight trains traveling across its system, while eliminating the need for doubleheading. So, the railroad's designers went to the American Locomotive Company's Brooks Works with a proposal for a 3-cylinder, 67-inch drivered 412-2. Number 9000 was delivered for testing and was found to be very successful, even with its very long rigid wheelbase. This success would kickstart a tradition of innovation that the railroad has embraced ever since. The railroad quite liked the new Union Pacific types as they became known, but they desired even more power and speed from their locomotives. They again turned to Alco, and in 1936 the first Challengers began arriving on the scene. While the Challenger would not be unique to the Union Pacific, the UP was the first to design and order them, and would end up owning a total of 105 of them. Satisfied with their Challengers, but still desiring more power, in 1941, UP would again return to Alco for the locomotive that they would eventually become the most famous for, the Big Boys. The Big Boys were truly massive machines, and would be some of the largest and most powerful steam locomotives to operate anywhere in the world. The design would remain unique to the UP for a variety of reasons, despite their incredible success. Incidentally, Union Pacific is currently operating one of these locomotives today, Union Pacific Big Boy number 4014. I have some more footage of it operating in Illinois in 2024. I'll add a link to that video down below in the description if you're interested. As steam locomotives began to fall out of favor on American railroads, UP began to search for alternatives that would match the sheer power of their Big Boys and Challengers. In 1948, UP ordered a test locomotive to be built that used a gas turbine electric system from Alco GE. The locomotive proved to be reliable and successful enough that UP ended up ordering a total of 55 gas turbines in 3 designs from Alco GE between 1948 and 1961. These locomotives produced between 4,500 and 8,500 horsepower, depending on the specific model. While these turbines were considered successful on the UP, other railroads generally stayed away from the turbines as they were viewed as impractical and more of a novelty. The turbines proved to be very fuel hungry, and as fuel prices increased, the railroad began looking to diesel locomotives to offer the same kind of power that the turbines could deliver while saving fuel. In the early 1960s, UP put out a requirement for all of the major locomotive builders for 3-unit sets of locomotives capable of 15,000 horsepower to move its time freights over the entire system. The railroad ended up with the DD-35 and DDA-35 from EMD, the U-50 and U-50C from General Electric, and the C-855 from Alco. The U-50s and C-855s were not seen as successful, but the DD-35s from EMD were quite liked by the railroad and served into the late 1970s. Eventually, the railroad ordered an upgrade of the DD-35 concept from EMD, which would evolve into the 6,600 horsepower DDA-40X of 1969. These locomotives would all primarily operate for the Union Pacific, with Southern Pacific being the only other purchaser of DDA-35s and U-50s. The world-famed double diesels served the railroad well, but eventually fell prey to time. The last of the double diesels were eventually pulled from service and retired by the mid-1980s. However, Union Pacific was always in search of more horsepower. As a result, they became an enthusiastic supporter of the horsepower race between Electromotive and General Electric in the 1980s and early 1990s. The race culminated in the ill-fated 6,000 horsepower AC6000CW and SD90 Mac projects, with Union Pacific being the largest purchaser of both models. Of the 314 total AC6000CWs built by General Electric, UP ended up purchasing 186 of them. As for the SD90 Mac, of the 478 total SD90s produced, UP ended up with 371 of them. So the question remains, why did Union Pacific purchase so many large and powerful locomotives for so long? I have narrowed down the answer to that question to 4 primary factors. Let's go over them. First is the terrain that Union Pacific operates over. UP's primary artery has always been its lengthy Council Bluffs, Iowa to Los Angeles, California main line. This line is quite demanding for locomotives as it crosses the plains of Iowa, Nebraska, and eastern Wyoming, the mountains of western Wyoming and Utah, the deserts of Nevada, and the foothills of California. To make the route viable, Union Pacific needs to move a lot of tonnage, long distance, which in turn demands expediency. Much of the route Union Pacific chose as their transcontinental route has remained relatively desolate and uninhabited even to this day. This has denied the railroad the opportunity to earn revenue directly from industries served along its line, and instead has required the railroad to compete in the long-distance freight market connecting the fertile and prosperous Midwest with the populous shipping centers of the West Coast. The best way for railroads to compete in this market while under the thumb of heavy government regulations was to expedite shipments. Larger locomotives can pull the same length train much faster. The grades of Wyoming and Utah have always posed a significant challenge to the railroad, and they usually dictate the road's motive power needs at any particular time. 2 obstacles in particular, Sherman Hill in Wyoming and the route through Echo and Weber Canyons in Utah, were really difficult pieces of railroad to try to tackle. Sherman Hill, with its 1.55% grades on tracks 1 and 2 and 0.8% grade of track 3, often rated extra power on the Union Pacific's long-distance freight trains before the introduction of larger motive power. Union Pacific's new steam locomotives provided a major cost benefit to the railroad on this stretch of line because they were able to eliminate the need for double heading and having dedicated helper crews and locomotives solely dedicated to the mountain crossing. Helpers are always an expensive proposition for any railroad that employs them, and the elimination of this service on Sherman Hill saved the railroad a tremendous amount of money. After the steam era, the railroad determined that most locomotives cost about the same to operate and maintain on their run from Council Bluffs to LA, regardless of their horsepower rating. Therefore, management figured, the cheapest way to operate these long-distance trains was to run them with as few locomotives as possible. Sherman Hill and the run through Utah would, of course, still require a tremendous amount of horsepower to lift trains up and over the Rocky Mountains. This continued to encourage the railroad to squeeze every ounce of horsepower out of single locomotives. Second, Union Pacific management has always emphasized innovation in all areas of the railroad. After all, this group of managers was also a big supporter of early streamliners and greenlit the M10,000 project, the city streamliner train sets, and the streamlining of some of the road's passenger steam locomotives. The road also leased one of the GM Aero train sets in the late 1950s to trial the proposed new lightweight train sets. Later in the century, Union Pacific paired with American President Lines to introduce the very first double-stack container train, which has since become an industry standard. In addition, Union Pacific was an early adopter of the fast freight business model. All the way back in the 1920s, while other railroads were still in the depths of the drag freight era of railroading, Union Pacific management was already looking to the future of railroading. The idea that more freight could be hauled over the same railroad if the trains moved much faster was fairly new in the industry, and the UP realized the value of this business model very early, especially with their aforementioned route being relatively devoid of online customers. This business model has also become an industry standard and has enabled railroads to compete with trucking effectively. UP is constantly upgrading and streamlining its main line to accommodate the increases in traffic the railroad has seen over the years. In many regards, then, UP management was very forward-thinking, and this absolutely translated to the railroad's motive power department. This is a breath of fresh air from an industry that is notorious for refusing to innovate. The railroad has facilitated this innovation not only in its operating and motive power departments, but also in its infrastructure. This leads me to my third point, the railroad's infrastructure. During and after the Harriman era in the first half of the 20th century, the railroad consistently took on massive projects to improve its main line from Council Bluffs to LA. In particular, its route over the Rocky Mountains. Beginning in 1897, when E.H. Harriman took control of the railroad, the UP undertook a project to relocate main lines to ease grades, upgrade stations, and double-track the entire line from Council Bluffs to Salt Lake City. According to WyomingHistory.org, Harriman finished most of the improvements by 1902, but even after his death in 1909, work continued on double-tracking the UP line across Wyoming all the way to Granger, Wyoming until 1917. This massive project was finally completed in 1949 with the construction of Altamont Tunnel in Wyoming. The railroad also upgraded locomotive servicing facilities, yard tracks, tunnels and bridges to handle the size and weight of the larger locomotives that were being delivered, especially the big boys. Even in the modern day, upgrades are still being made to Union Pacific's main lines. The line over Sherman Hill was upgraded with full centralized traffic control in 1953 and controlled from Cheyenne, Wyoming, and was upgraded again to be controlled from the groundbreaking Harriman Dispatch Center in Omaha, Nebraska in 1989. The railroad has also managed to triple track this part of the railroad to allow for operation in any direction on any track. These upgrades have encouraged and supported the running of longer, faster, and more efficient trains over the entire railroad. The big boys, turbines, and double diesels took full advantage of these upgrades by hustling mile-long freights over the system and eliminating the need for slow helper operations at any point on the railroad. As you can imagine, all of these upgrades and new locomotives were not an inexpensive operation. This leads me to my final point, the railroad's finances. At the end of the 19th century, the Union Pacific was in dire financial position and ended up in receivership after the Panic of 1893. In 1897, the railroad was auctioned off and was sold to the aforementioned E.H. Harriman. Harriman was a wealthy industrialist who managed to inject the railroad with an enormous amount of cash to make upgrades and streamline the entire system. Harriman's efforts resulted in an enormous improvement in the railroad's finances. At the end of the Harriman era, the Union Pacific was the most profitable railroad in the West, bringing in a total of $8,167 of revenue per mile, compared to the $7,528 of revenue per mile of its next highest earning competitor. This set the road up to be a powerhouse of the railroad industry for more than a century afterwards. The railroad managed to remain solvent during the Great Depression, finding ways to trim back unprofitable services and retiring scores of older and less useful steam locomotives. World War II and the following post-war boom eras left the railroad stronger than ever, with the company seeing continued growth through the 1950s. As the century wore on, many other railroads started falling prey to bankruptcy and merger. The UP, on the other hand, stayed relatively strong through the 70s and began acquiring other railroads at a prodigious rate in the 80s and 90s. This continued financial success allowed the railroad to consistently invest in itself to keep its business model up to date and often stay ahead of the curve. Success feeds success, as you might say. High revenues allowed for high levels of investment in infrastructure and rolling stock, which gave the company a high value on return. Long story short, the railroad was able to afford these large orders of custom locomotives that fit the railroad's needs perfectly. In conclusion, the Union Pacific Railroad has a long and storied history of ordering unique and typically successful motive power that fits the railroad's needs perfectly. The big boys, Challengers, turbines, double diesels, and Gevos have been railfan favorites for a century now, and Union Pacific has truly embraced this fact. Their heritage fleet plies the rails today, bringing the history of the railroads and the history of Union Pacific to people all over the system. They are well remembered for their giant locomotives and fast trains that have been connecting east and west since the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Point in 1869. They were able to achieve these feats of engineering through a unique combination of routing, competent management, good infrastructure, and solid finances. So, the next time you see a train of armor yellow locomotives, just remember how it all happened. And maybe next time, you'll be specific and ship Union Pacific.